Welcome to Fireside with Peter Adkison on Gen Con TV. On this show, we go in search of the untold stories behind your favorite games, and we are still taking a deep dive into Dungeons and Dragons and all the people that worked on it back in the 90s, especially because that's when I was working on it. So that's what that's the people I know. So our guest today, who I got a chance to work with for many years, Keith Strohm. He started working at TSR in 1995. Just a couple of years before I entered the scene, and he went with me to Seattle, to Wizards of the Coast, and where he served as a brand manager for Dungeons and Dragons, and went on to be a category manager for all tabletop RPGs for Wizards of the Coast, and then went on to Sabertooth and to Paizo. He had a great history with me and after me, working on all sorts of games. So so Keith. Great. Welcome. Thanks for coming to the show.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. This is awesome. I love this. Thanks.
So good to see you. You know, I've mentioned a couple of times on these that the best part is just getting to sit down and chat for an hour with people that I worked with 20 some years ago and talking in a way that's not like we got really a chance to talk back in those days, you know?
No, you're absolutely right. There's no other meeting pinning up, right next to us, or you don't have people coming in and out. This is great.
I know. So before we get right into the thick of D&D, I want to let everybody get to know Keith Strohm a little bit. Like,
sure.
Who was Keith before TSR? Like, where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? Take me up to that point of joining TSR.
Okay, yeah. I grew up in Long Island, actually, right on the border of Queens. So I've worked really hard to get rid of my accent.
Wow.
It sometimes comes out, but
the New York accent's a great accent. Why would you want to get rid of the New York accent?
One of the main reasons is that every time I go somewhere, people don't really listen to what I say; they just want to hear how I say it. So, if I want to be understood, I had to just kind of modify my accent.
All right.
Yeah. But I grew up there and went to school at State University of New York at Buffalo, is where I went my undergrad. And then I went to Binghamton University in the state university system, and that's about 4 hours away from Buffalo. And I got my master's in English literature there.
English literature masters. This is a common theme at TSR, by the way. I've noticed a lot of English degrees, English literature degrees. It must have somebody wrote a job requirements way back in the day, and then it became templated, right?
I think it was in the water. I remember actually, David Wise was the person who hired me. And I think he came out of that background, a similar background as well. And so when I happened to meet a girl that I was dating at the time was working with a guy who knew Dale Donovan. This is how I started, it's just, and when he heard I had a master's degree, he was like, you gotta send the resume in. So I think that master's degree was that open door for editing. So
Right. So now did you go straight there after school then? Straight to TSR? Or
I did not. I spent a year actually doing some volunteer service in Milwaukee, in the inner city of Milwaukee. So I did that for a year.
Okay.
Still managed to play. I was playing D&D throughout all of this. Still managed to play D&D. And so I spent a year there. And then pretty much right after that, that's when I got connected with Dale Donovan.
Okay, I got to ask you why you would go from New York to Milwaukee. I mean, unless you went there for Gen Con and then just like, this is a lot of fun. I think I'm just going to stay here until Gen Con comes around again.
You know what? There were a number of different programs that were kind of available, and I looked at it, and this was the volunteer program that really connected with me. Right. So it was Milwaukee. But when I was there, I remember I was looking at the back of a Dragon magazine. I don't know why. I was just kind of reading it, and I realized
you were a D&D player, so it makes.
I was, yeah.
I mean, every page of Dragon magazine you look at.
I did, absolutely, for sure. And the back of it just said, it's in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and I was like, well, okay. I wonder how far away that is, and it was only like an hour away from where I lived. And so that started my brain spinning, and I was like, I'd love to work there or visit there or whatever. So that kind of drew me like a lodestone. Like I just kept coming back to this idea of I'd love to work for TSR.
Right. how did that happen then? Like you mentioned Dale Donovan. So did you did they run help wanted ads on the nickel paper?
No, they literally didn't. This was serendipity. Like I said, I was dating this girl who was working at a company who was best friends with Dale Donovan. And so we all went out because I was like, oh, can you invite Dale Donovan out? Because I wanted to geek out. Right. And we were at the Water Street Brewery, which is a pretty popular place in the Milwaukee area. And we had dinner. And in the course of that, Dale heard that I had a master's degree. And then he was just like, hey, you should submit. We've got an opening. He said, I'll walk your resume right to Dave Wise's desk. Right. And so I was like, cool. I must not have geeked out too much. I really tried hard not to tell him about my characters.
You got to keep your cool in those moments.
That's exactly right. I didn't want to just let it all hang out.
Right.
So we said, that'd be great. And so that began. And then I got a call. I remember I was actually playing, forget what game system it was, but I was playing a Shadowrun computer game. I remember the day I got the call from HR at TSR. Right. And they're like, will you come in for an interview? And I just thought it was a dream.
Wow. Yeah. I get it. I totally get that. Yeah. So you went in.
Yeah, I went in. No, it's okay. I went in for the interview and I got really excited. I think a couple of days after that, I remember going to a barbecue. Dale invited me to come, and it was like all of the TSR designers that I had like read their work and played their games. And I just sat in the corner trying to, literally, I was trying not to geek out. I think Lester Smith bore the burden of my geekiness. I just couldn't deal with it anymore. And I was just, I really love your work. And we just started talking, and he was very kind and gracious. But clearly I was just a fan who had wandered into a place where they're not, those guys didn't think they were on. But when I was there, I was asking so many questions.
Right. That's great. That's fab. So you got the job. Was there more to the interview process? Or
no, it was an interview with David Wise. I remember we had a long conversation. I met a few other people. And then 2 days later, I got the offer to start as an editor, working on the D&D team.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, well, of course, I know David well. He came out to Seattle with you years later, and great guy. So, So what was your impression of David? Like your interview, what was it like to go in there and talk to him and stuff?
I was very intimidated, to be honest with you. First of all, if you remember, the management offices were all in one area of the building. So when you were in R&D, you never went down there. So even just coming in, there was a feel of this is a fortress that you're going into.
Yeah. So you were going to the other side of the tracks. You were going
that's exactly right.
Up from Shantytown up to the knob.
To the big time. Yeah. And David was very gracious. He asked a lot of great questions. I took an editing test at the time, and I think 2 days later I got the call.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah. I honestly was probably one of the greatest moments, and when I think back of it in my life. It's just I had a dream of working at TSR, and all of a sudden it had come true.
So what was the job? What job were you hired to do? What was your first day at work?
Well, I was hired to be, I was an editor for the D&D creative team. So I was working on core D&D products, the core line. My first day was a little bit of the bubble bursting a little bit, because I had, first of all, envisioned that TSR was housed in a giant dragon-shaped skyscraper, right? But
not an old Q-tip factory.
Not an old Q-tip factory. So, and then I went in, and I think one of the first things I had to do is I had to help Rich Baker, who was a designer. He had to come up with weights for particular items, like mundane items and he's like, well, how much do you think that should weigh? And I'm like, I don't know. He's like, I think like 2 pounds. That's what we're going to put on it. I was like, we're not measuring. We don't have a vault with all these things are there. So that was seeing how the sausage was made first day. That was a little overwhelming.
Oh wow! Yeah. So we're asked in chat. Chat's asking old Q-tip factory. Did I get that right? Isn't that true?
Yeah, I think it was a Q-tip factory.
The TSR. We're not talking about the WotC office. We're talking about the TSR offices in Lake Geneva, which were a home to Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, I don't know, since it's got to be late 70s, early 80s. Yeah. John Peterson would know.
Yes.
But yeah. It was a Q-tip factory at one point,
and it was not in great condition, as a Q-tip factory, right?
Well, it was an office at this point, but it was laid out. It was the one thing that was Dungeons and Dragons themed, however, was that it was labyrinthine. I mean, yes. You could easily get lost. You better draw a map.
I did get lost once. I got lost over where the sales team was, and it was very scary.
I shortly after we acquired TSR, I found the cartographers because I got lost. And the irony in that, right?
Yep. They were tucked away in the hardest to find place. It was like a little den, right?
I know, they had this crazy den. That's a story from a different day. So, all right. Okay, so you got helping. You were helping David Wise do weights and measurements for
Rich Baker. Yeah, I was helping Rich Baker.
Excuse me. Yeah,
weights and measurements.
Whatever.
And I'm trying to remember my first product, one of my first products, but it was Sages and Specialists by Matt Forbeck. So that was around the time that second edition was. They were putting out lots of different kinds of books, and that one was about obviously Sages. And so I was editing his work.
And this is 1995, right?
This was 95, yeah. And using WordPerfect for DOS. I remember just thinking back, I don't know how we got anything done, but we did, right?
Now I've had Skip Williams on here talking about typing and leading, and so you had it lucky, Keith.
You know what? This is how bad this is. I think is it Angie Locotes, who's been she's done layout for for such a long time. I thought she was going to string me up the first time I handed over a book, because the editors traditionally did just kind of the rough layout on a template.
Right.
And I had way more pages than I had space for. And I think I just said something like, just make it fit. Right. And she sat me down and she said, yeah, I really can't do that. Right. We only have a certain amount of space. And I don't know, what I'm supposed to, that's your job.
Yeah, right. Like, you want me, the typesetter, to figure out what text to cut?
Yeah, exactly. So I that's probably not my brightest moment on the TSR staff, but I just definitely remember that in connection to typing and WordPerfect and trying to match those things up.
Right.
So yeah, it was good, and I think I did recall the different experience that a writer or a designer can have as opposed to an editor, because I remember
talk about that.
Yeah, it was, well, just even the kind of work that we did. I would get a draft from a designer, and then I would start digging into it. And of course, in those days, in particular, like, I liked working on paper, so I printed it out, and then I had a red pen, and then I would just mark up the text, right? And then I would go back in and I would make my edits based on that. And I realized then that not everybody loves to be edited, right? And so I went to go get something to drink, and I came back, and there was just a little note on my desk from the designer of the product, who's a good friend of mine. I won't name him, but he said,
what how about his initials? Will you tell us his initials?
I don't know if I should. But when I went to see him, he was like, hey, I was in your office and I saw the manuscript on your desk. And he was aghast, because he was like, am I that bad of a writer? Is that, I go, no, that's just the normal, like, we all need editing. And it just looks worse than it is, right? It'll all come back on a page, it'll be nice. But there's just kind of a different mindset that editors enter into.
Right. Yeah, this has been this is a fun topic. I don't know why I'm so intrigued with this, because I've talked about it with a couple other TSR alumni. The process of editing at TSR, the way I understand it, is, you know, the editor is also kind of a project manager, also works with the art team and the cartographers, and does the actual editing as well. Not really development work. Is that right?
Yeah, it just depends, right? It depends on the, like, sometimes you would work in collaboration with the designer if stuff needed to be developed a little bit more. But generally, at least I would never, I just wouldn't change things without kind of going back to the designer and say, hey, this doesn't seem like it's working here. What can we do about it? So it was kind of it was a little bit of a different piece. Now, some people kind of were, I don't know, switch hitters, right? So some people kind of went from, they were editing one project and then they designed another project. And it was, I think, famous back then where there was just freelance for everybody, right? If you wanted freelance and you kind of managed to convince Bruce Hurd that you could handle it, you could get on the freelance schedule. And then, so that's how I was an editor, but managed to do of Ships in the Sea, which is the...
And to be clear what that is for somebody tuning in, what Keith's talking about here is the way I understand it in TSR culture, you could have your full-time job, and there was these expectations of what you had to do, like any full-time job. But if you wanted to do essentially overtime, you could work as a freelancer on a contract basis, I assume, to pick up extra work. But was there some provision about it had to be kind of outside your normal, like if you were an editor, the freelance work had to be as a writer?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember that. It's certainly, they tried to kind of separate some of that stuff out. For sure. And it was always, you know, you wanted to make sure that you turned over your stuff so that you got additional freelance, right? Because Bruce Hurd was a good project manager, right? A harsh taskmaster.
He was a tough guy. Yes. I always liked him. I mean, you know, as somebody who...
I did too, but I was afraid of him.
Yeah, exactly. I was afraid of him, and he worked for me. I mean, it was like I was afraid of him too. Like this guy is okay, but you need somebody who's a hard ass in the organization to keep the trains running on time. You know,
he was great, absolutely.
Yeah. So in this period of like 95 to 97, when the acquisition, you know, during this period, the pre-WotC period there at TSR. So tell me about some other projects you worked on, or other designers you edited or worked with, like...
Absolutely. No, I did a lot of work pretty early on. I did a lot of work with Bruce Cordell. He and I had started at the same time.
What a great guy.
He's amazing, right? He's a good friend of mine. Absolutely loved working with him. Honestly, he's brilliant, right? The stuff that comes out of his brain. So that was amazing. I got to do some work with Monty Cook as well.
I've had both of them on my show. I mean, in all fairness, Monty, I reached out to right off the bat.
Yeah,
right?
Sure. That makes perfect sense, right? But I know, I remember actually was getting to know Monty that he introduced me to Call of Cthulhu. Because I made a stupid, something stupid came out of my mouth. And I just said to him, because he was talking about
That's why you're a good guest, Keith. That's
Well, especially in those days, something stupid would come out of my mouth. And I said, hey, I don't know if it's possible. He's like, what about like playing Call of Cthulhu? I'm like, I don't know. How could you be scared in a role-playing game? Right? Like how could you do that? And he's like, okay, challenge accepted. And he invited me to start playing in his Call of Cthulhu campaign. And I got to be honest with you, scared. Like, I remember being petrified. And his house at that point was in a renovated church. So it was an old church.
Right.
I remember going to bed, because I would stay over, because I lived in the north side of Milwaukee. So when we would game, I would just stay at his house. I would have nightmares. It was the scariest thing. And I learned to love horror role-playing games, right? And he was such an excellent keeper, just amazing.
I just can't imagine. That would be awesome to learn how to play Call of Cthulhu from Monty Cook. That would just,
I mean, it was, I think at one point, both he and Bruce Cordell, they co-ran a one-shot game where we were kind of trapped in a submarine, and they had like the subdued lighting, and they had the sonar pings going in the background, like all through the game. Honestly, it was amazing.
Wow, that's great. I just realized, I just had an epiphany. The worst thing, there's many great things, but the worst thing about my 30 years now in tabletop gaming is all the people I know who I didn't actually get to play a game with.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sad.
I will say this, and this was the great thing about TSR, is that we all gamed, especially those of us in R&D, and you could, if you wanted to, you could do a different game a night. Like some of us were in 3 or 4 games going on, so you'd work all day on role playing, you'd go home, and then you'd game some more.
Right. Wow. Cool. All right. Any other stories from that era that you want to tell me about before before the WotC?
I will say this.
Yeah.
I realized I discovered firsthand how difficult designing was when I was given Of Ships in the Sea, right? Which was I remember you came and you saw that book, and you were like, because it had tons of charts, and you were like, this is D&D, right? We've got charts, but I had to develop a ship-to-ship combat system, which Steve Winter, who was the creative director, he helped me. He basically designed the direct ship-to-ship, and I developed the rest of it. Right. It was mind-blowing how you have to think as a designer. Yeah. And then you play test, and then you realize everything I have put down needs to be completely changed, right? Because how I thought this was going to work and how it works are 2 totally different things. Like I gained so much appreciation for designers.
Can you remember an example? I know I'm really putting you on the spot. Something like a rules mechanic, because people love to hear that sort of stuff,
I mean, I'm dredging it up, but this is just the rules for using like grape shot, in ship-to-ship combat. I just realized the complexity of the math I was asking people to do, and you had to roll you couldn't even hold the dice in one hand. You had to just. There were so many variables, and I realized.
Well, that sounds like a good thing, by the way, not being able to hold the dice in one hand. Now that part sounds. I think you were on something there.
Well, see, here's the thing. It would take ship combat could take all night. It was almost like it became like a tactical war game. Which is
again, that sounds great to me. Keith, what the problem? You had the wrong people play testing this.
I think I did.
That sounds fantastic.
That's why you love that book, I really think. But I realized I had to streamline some things just in that, and it was difficult.
So if you just called it a first edition, call it an AD&D expansion, it would have been fine.
That's right. Everyone would have expected all of that, but my inexperience definitely showed, but I had great help. The other designers kicked in, and they gave me great feedback. It wasn't always easy to hear, but it was great feedback for sure.
Right. Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other piece I remember, this is, talking about business side of things. I think in at TSR and R&D, we were isolated a lot from all of the rest of the company. And so the fact that this was a business wasn't really a top of our mind as I think we were designing, right? We were kind of figuring out what's going to be cool. We'd interact with the sales team, and they'd kind of, give us some feedback. But by and large, and I worked with Steve Winter as he was the creative director, they called it back in the day. Yep. And I was the, whatever it was, the creative director second, which means I just gophered a lot for him. Sure. But I learned a little bit about the business side of things, but it still was pretty unknown. And I remember when you came, you sat down and there was the Sea Devils book, which is part of the Monstrous Arcana series, right?
So let me set this up a little bit for everybody. Okay. So you're going to the period when some Wizards, when we acquired TSR, and part of the process was that I came out and had the wonderful, it's kind of like your story about the barbecue, coming out to TSR multiple occasions, meeting all the people whose names I'd grown up with over the years, Skip Williams, the Sage, and Kim Mohan, and so on and so forth. And so I had these meetings with each of the teams, and so this would have been the first time we met, I think.
It was the first time we met. You were in a larger meeting, but this is like kind of a small group. It was like 10 people around the table.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So that's the context. And so you were showing me your pride and joy there or something.
Well,
right?
you were basically going through the D&D line.
Yeah.
and kind of going like, great, awesome, terrible, had some problems, right? You were calling it as you saw it, and you had the financial information, which we didn't, as designers. And so you got to the Sea Devils book, and you're like, why is this book so expensive to make, right? Because it was embossed, it was like full color throughout, and we weren't selling it for a ton of money. And I made the mistake of piping in bravely and just saying, well, it's our premium line. And you just slammed that book down on the table and you says, a premium line makes no sense if it loses money. Like, why would we do this? And that's when it hit me. Like, oh, this is a business. And we have to think differently, right? But I just remember, I was like, oh, like you were passionate. That was the beautiful, you were passionate about the products, but you're also passionate about the business itself, right? We've got to deliver quality, but it has to also be, on a strategically make sense for the company. And
I had no problem with premium products, but you got a premium product, you got to charge a premium price.
I think that might have been the follow-up line that you gave, and I was just like, I got nothing. So I walked away a little intimidated by that too. I was like, I hope he forgets this whole conversation.
I did totally forget that conversation. I totally forgot that story.
I've never forgotten it.
Oh, well. We all have these stories that we the stories that we remember, the stories when we screw up, like I remember a lot of those stories about myself, times that I made big mistakes, but yeah, it's the way the world. Yeah.
I have a few of those.
Yeah. So do you, anything else from that time, or should we move on to Seattle?
I mean, we could move on. I mean, for me, that was it. When I look back on it, that was like a little bit of a paradise, right? Because we disconnected from the business, we could create the products that we loved.
Right.
I mean, there was a lot of tension, right? Because suddenly we weren't getting a lot of information, books weren't being printed, things. But by and large, I was with a group of people I had admired my whole life, and I had a dream. So it was beautiful. And then there was that moment of dissonance when all of a sudden money's not flowing, and we didn't know if we were going to have a job. And the next thing you know, there's this announcement that we're being bought by this company in Seattle, and I think we were all a bit shell shocked.
Yeah, it must be tough, Let's see. Oh wait, here we got a couple of messages here. Not able to hold all the dice in one hand. Sounds like Warhammer 40,000 or Star Wars D6 with high point characters. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Derek and Daza, joining in there. Okay, so yeah, I think that I think it'd be rough to be working at a company that you loved, which you clearly did, and and when the company goes through a tough time financially, that's got to be really hard, and then the company getting bought has got to be so fierce, so much fear around that, like what's going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of that for a lot of us, and I just remember when the layoffs were coming before you were out. We'd have these waves of layoffs. Steve Winter just gave me the best advice anyone's ever given me when that happens. He's like, just put your head down, do your work, try not to stress about it, just keep quiet, and just see if the angel of death passes over you. And that was really helpful advice for me. But that was what it was like. It was a lot of turmoil, and we didn't know what was up, and we weren't really getting a lot of information.
Yeah.
And the information we were getting wasn't always necessarily accurate. I'll just put it that way. And so there was a little bit of, I think, distrust early on, as you and your team kind of came in, but also a little bit of like, it's like we were captives that were kind of being freed, right? there was a little bit of that, I think, as well.
Yeah. Well, I for us, it was for Wizards, it was a fortunate situation. I mean, acquisitions are always tough, but what made that one a lot better was that you're helping a company that has out of financially horrible straits. And so, and the company went through difficult times long enough that it was obvious to everybody, and as painful as that was, it was at least everybody knew, hey, we're not printing products, and we're a publishing company, and we haven't made, we haven't printed anything in 6 months or whatever. So we had the opportunity to get get things back in print and get things flowing out of the warehouse and get things going. So that was good. So so the move to Seattle, like what was it like to get that that offer to move and the process of making the decision, or like what did you think of that?
Well, I think it's a little bit of that kind of, it was a culture shock. Right? I remember your team sat down with those of us who were remaining, all the TSR employees, but this is before we knew who was getting offers to come or not. And you just laid out, here's our company culture. Here's WotC's, Wizards company culture. Here's the culture of the Pacific Northwest as opposed to the Midwest. I remember kind of those kind of conversations. So it was a unique time. I remember, I love change. I actually love change, which served me well during that time because it was exciting. I didn't know what was going to happen, and rather than being completely terrified, I was slightly terrified and also kind of excited. So when I got that offer letter, and it was just a I remember a beautiful day, and I just had a conversation with my friends and my family, and they just said, you have to do it. This is your dream. You've got to pursue it. Yeah. And I remember we flew out that first day, that first time to go visit the Wizards offices. I remember getting off the plane and the Pacific Northwest smell of basically like cedar.
Yeah.
It has this incredible smell. Whenever I'm gone for a long time from the Pacific Northwest and I step back in, it had this amazing, and it just felt welcoming. So it was exciting finding an apartment, getting settled. The Wizards building was a lot bigger than the Q-tip factory. So I think we had all 4 of the buildings at the time, and that right. So that was just a kind of like being on a little dungeon adventure in and of itself.
Right. And so what I know you eventually ended up on the brand team.
Yes.
Right. Because to kind of explain this, everybody watching, Wizards had a different structure. We had a structure of what we call the brand management structure at Wizards, where you had departments that would do things like writing and editing and artwork and all the things you think of as the functional steps in the process of making a book. Yeah. But then you would have a business team or brand management team that would coordinate with all these departments and articulate a strategy for the business. So I mean, I'm trying to think of like, what was because I don't remember this is like an honest question, like how did you go from being an editor to being on the brand a business management team?
One of the things that I did early on, because I had this experience as Steve Winter's second, right, the creative director's second. So I was doing some other aspects of, the role-playing game kind of non-creative side. And I was intrigued by it. And so I wrote that down. I remember kind of going, when I met with HR in the Midwest, I said, here's a list of the things that I do. And so that was always in my mind. But there was a culture at TSR where the creatives in the business were like the Hatfield and the McCoys, right? You sold your soul if you worked on the business side of things.
Oh wow, Keith! I gotta say, I haven't. Nobody has been so bold as you in saying that. That's pretty.
I mean, that's just. It's just. I remember, and one of the designers, basically when he found out, because we had the choice, you could stick with the R&D or you could shift over to the brand side. And I had just been promoted to brand manager for Dungeons and Dragons before we made the official split. We were still working out of the kind of that structure. We were called brand managers, even though it hadn't quite gotten cross-functional yet. Right. So I had just been like a month before moved into that slot. And I remember when the decision was you have to kind of stay in R&D or go on the brand team. And I chose the brand team. Basically, there were people who called me a suit, right? It was like I had betrayed them.
Yeah.
You know, in some ways. Yeah, and I think, again, it's not that they were bad people. These are friends of mine. It's just the culture at TSR was ingrained. So I remember saying, yeah, I'd love to do it. And I think at the time, Ryan Dancy was going to be, he was placed in charge of the D&D brand teams.
He was my man.
Yep. Which, you know, I'm grateful for, because this is kind of serendipity. He said to me, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to join the brand team. He's like, great, we'd love to have you. And then like 2 months later, I find out that he thought I had been the D&D brand manager at TSR for like a decade. Right? He had no idea that I was like brand spanking new in that role. Like 2 months before that, I had gotten promoted. So, I mean,
you had to have become the brand manager for D&D within the TSR group at Wizards of the Coast then, because that title didn't exist at TSR.
Correct. No, it was basically, we moved out, and I think like maybe 4 or 6 months after we moved out, that the spot opened for the D&D brand management. And I remember the D&D brand manager at the time made me clean out his desk and organize his files. And I'm doing it, and I'm getting like, I'm mad, right? I'm like, why am I doing this work? The reason he did that is because he knew he was going to offer me the position. I was going to be offered the position of brand manager, and he wanted his files to be my files. Right? It was actually really interesting. And then I found out that I moved into it, and then 2 months later, the decision had to be made. Are you going to go brand, or are you going to stay in R&D?
So who gave you the job of being the TSR or the D&D brand manager?
I want to say,
was it a TSR person or a WotC?
Yeah, no, it was a TSR person, because we were still, because I think it was the head of R&D at the time. And I'm trying to remember.
I mean, eventually that was Bill Slavicsek, but this sounds like...
That was Bill. No, it was Bill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
So because
it took us a while to hire. It took us a while before we put Bill in that spot, actually.
So maybe, yes, maybe I'm compressing some time.
Yeah. Could have been Harold Johnson or...
No, I mean, I know it was Bill Slavicsek.
All right.
I know it was Bill Slavicsek because I got the call 2 days before I was getting married. So I do remember that, but it was great. But then pretty soon after that, Ryan Dancy, you placed Ryan Dancy in that position, and he said, make a choice. And I did, and I fooled him. He thought I had been there for 10 years. So.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I know.
That is so funny.
That was the beginning. I'll be really honest. That brand team really began to form pretty solid, right?
I always had, I mean, well, I heard that before. I'd always had the impression that was a really tight team. Let's say you were with Ryan Dancy with, I think, Cindy Rice Chamberlain, maybe, was on the team.
I don't know.
She was a WotC.
Yeah, no, I remember that. I think I'm not sure if she was on the team. Yes, she was early on. I think she was. Yep. And David Wise.
And Lisa Stevens, maybe, right?
Lisa Stevens, David Wise, Jim Butler.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that team kind of came together.
So a real behind the scenes question, I think that I know some things I think are interesting are not necessarily what other people think.
Yeah.
But it's my show. So, it's like whatever I think.
Let's do it.
That's what's going to be. Like, so maybe try and describe what did, because I think this is at the heart of one of the functional differences or organizational differences between the two companies. So what did this team do, and how was that different from how things were done at TSR?
I think first and foremost, that team set the strategic direction for role-playing games, because it encompassed all of the role-playing brands. It was working closely with R&D, it was working closely with marketing, it was working closely with sales, organized play, all of those things. But we really began to kind of set the strategy. And of course, once the talk of third edition began, we began to put together kind of a framework, right? On which we could launch third edition. And so that was way different, because previously when we were at TSR, it was just editing and design. I mean, that's pretty much all you touch. You might kind of talk about what products you want to release or what titles they're going to be, but we really went in there and said, well, who are we going to target, right? What's going to be our price point? What's our release strategy? That was a completely different mindset. And Ryan Dancy was really good. I will say this. He goes, if you're looking for a mentor, because I went to him and I said, I really want a mentor. And he said, that's not me. I'm not a mentor. He said, but if you watch and you observe and you hang close and you ask you ask questions, he said, you're going to learn. And I did. And I remember we did the very, very first thing we had to do was a sales presentation. And he said, you know what, these sales guys who are coming in, all the distributors, they're coming in, they're getting like PowerPoint presentation after PowerPoint presentation. So let's do something different. And so I don't know if you know this, the very first one we did the sales presentation essentially as if it were the Jerry Springer show.
Okay, tell me this story.
Yeah, well, literally each of the brand managers would come up and they'd be interviewed by Jerry Springer, and then they would talk about their release schedule. They would talk about the upcoming products in that way.
And who was Jerry Springer? It had to have been Ryan.
I think it was Ryan. Yeah. And here's the thing. I thought it was the most ridiculous idea I'd ever heard. And I was literally thinking to myself, I left R&D for this.
Yes.
This is going to be a disaster waiting to happen. But I tell you what, those distributors remembered our presentation. And
right.
We got so many positive comments. So that's when I looked at Ryan. I said, Ryan, listen, I think you're crazy. I said, but if you say walk into a volcano, I'll walk into a volcano. Right? Like I'm just gonna do it. Whatever you got going on, right? And
right.
So that was kind of how that team was. We tried to be really creative, and we had especially as third edition moved onto the horizon, we had to be, right? Because there was a launch of something that was going to be a major movement in the history of D&D. And the R&D team, that third edition team, you had picked the most incredible designers, and we wanted to launch it in a way that would kind of equal what we thought the game was going to be. So we had to be creative.
Yeah, well, it was a great team. Monty is brilliant and was already brilliant then, but really young,
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you had Skip Williams, also brilliant, but more sagely, all of this years, the ability to talk about the whole history of the game mechanically from the very beginning, and then and then our ringer Jonathan Tweet to really shake things up.
Actually, the thing that I observed from the outside is it was like iron sharpens iron, right? And so you get those guys in a room, and I think everything elevates, right? And I'll be honest, I mean, I think it's amazing. You think about the amount of math even that's involved in designing, in game design, and that's I have 2 degrees in English, right? I didn't get a degree in advanced mathematics.
Right.
Being in on just some of their conversations, I remember just thinking, I just got to hang on. I'm understanding 60% of everything that's coming out of people's mouths right now.
Right.
It was just amazing. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we did in terms of the business side of things, this game, which we knew was going to be kind of groundbreaking, we wanted to make sure it was successful.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So what do you remember from the 3rd edition launch from your perspective, from working on the brand team for D&D, for arguably the biggest, most important moment of D&D's history in the 90s? What was that? What do you remember from inside that bubble?
I mean, I remember spending a lot of time online in message boards and forums, essentially fighting an edition war that when the new edition hadn't even come out yet, right? But I think the design principle that shifted everything, I think for me and for D&D, was basically, we're going to give you a set of tools, so you play the game that you want to play. And that opened up just on the marketing side of things, because we really believe that that's what the market wanted too. And so I remember like the shirt for the third edition launch, right, which was basically like the big reveal. It basically said, you know, Wizards with Swords, check, right? It had all of these things that traditional D&D didn't have,
right.
and it checked it, you know, it checked it off. And I think just that building of excitement of that kind of big reveal at Gen Con, when we kind of threw the you know, the curtains aside and said, this is it. I think that was amazing. It's a highlight for me of my time.
Yeah. I've got a somewhere buried in my stuff is a video of that Gen Con, the third edition presentation at Gen Con from I don't know, 1998 maybe ish.
It might have been 99.
99, probably 99.
I remember it's on the Dungeons and Dragons movie. It's actually an extra, like it's a DVD extra. And I remember I emceed that event, and I remember the camera got a really good shot of my nose hair. So the camera was like right underneath the podium. So in that DVD, all you could see is the inside of my nose. So
perfect.
Yeah,
that's what everybody was saying about it. They were
right. That's the reviews, right?
That's all. All I remember.
I just, you know, and we had, I think Gary Gygax was there and Dave Arneson was there, right? It was the energy in that room was electric.
Yeah.
Right. It was like just, you knew you were a part of history. That to me, right? Just a high. I remember just that whole Gen Con.
It was such an honor to have them, and have them both there, and have them both be nice and be on stage together. And after, neither one of them had an official voice at any event in, you know, what, 15 years, something like that.
I remember you being insistent. This is kind of what I remember in those days of honoring both of them. You said, you know what, and not that you had to convince anybody, but you were like, this is going to happen, right? We're going to do this. We're launching the third edition. I want them there. They deserve to be recognized.
Oh, I got to admit, I just took a guess on that. You know, there was always this big thing of like, well, who designed D&D? Was it Dave Arneson or Gary Gygax? Like, which deserves the credit? And there was the people in one camp, the people in the other camp, and we didn't know. I mean, like, and so we just said, listen, we're just going to say they co-designed it and leave it at that. And we're going to put both their names, you know, and they were, I mean, I think Dave was thrilled with that. And I think Gary was okay with it. And that's what we did. And then, so when I mentioned earlier, when we were talking before we started our stream, I was telling you about Playing at the World by John Peterson. He covers this in the history of Dungeons and Dragons, and I was so once I met him, you know, and I read the book, I was like, oh, I'm so glad that it was kind of true. I mean, really, I mean, if you really, they both deserve the credit, right? I mean,
but I think you know, I didn't know the inner struggle of, well, I don't know, you know what we should do. I just remember you saying, like, you always approached D&D not just from the business perspective, which you did, but certainly as a fan from inside. And so what the message coming across is, we're going to treat this well, and we're going to treat the people who worked on it well, and we're going to treat the you know, Dave and Gary really well, and we need to do this. And I always appreciated that. I always thought that was just a really classy way of bringing it forward, and it was a way of taking the history that happened with the history that was about to happen. I thought it was a great transition.
Oh, thank you. I was well, I felt I owed so much to you know, the two of them. You know, that's just, it's
So it was just amazing, and I still remember the electricity at that Gen Con.
Right.
I still remember. I also remember sitting in a meeting with you. It was a sales meeting, or it was a budget meeting. We were going over the budget for that year that we were launching Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition.
Yeah.
And I came in and I said, you know, we're going to sell 500,000 units of the Player's Handbook, 500,000 units of, you know, the DM's Guide. And, you know, we had the whole release schedule out, and I said, you know, 30,000 of this. And you basically, I remember it was great. You just said, I don't believe any of these numbers. It was you and Vince was there as well, Vince Calori, right? You were both of you like, I don't believe any of these numbers. And for once, I felt like I did my homework. So I had gone and sat with the sales team.
Right.
We had dug through all of the historical records, and I was able to show, hey, here's what we've sold historically when it launched. And then you signed up. I remember you just signing off on it. You were like, okay, let's do it. And I think we came pretty close to selling right around that number and right kind of at launch. I know that we had a reprint very quickly, but I just remember you were very practical. I don't believe these numbers. So luckily I had done my homework. And so we had some data that somebody had to pull out of archives somewhere, but we found them.
Well, I'm sure I did my typical thing and adjusted the projections down when I presented it to the board of directors. That was what they always did is, just gotta give yourself room to wiggle,
Yeah. Well, I just think we spent a lot of time on those products. We wanted high quality, right? We wanted because everybody complained about bindings of hardcover books, and so I remember the kind of the production team would come and they would say, okay, we think we've got a strong binding. Like this is not going to do anything. And so then we would just drop it. And I think the first 3 times that they came with the thing, we just dropped them and the binding separated immediately. And so we said, nope, go back. Right. And then they finally got it. And it just was, those books were high quality. And we had to fight a little bit because we felt at the time that the biggest competition two biggest competitions to 3rd edition was one, computer gaming, which had been growing,
right,
and also people playing 2nd edition. So we wanted the cost of conversion, in a sense, to be low for people, and so we priced those books, I think, at $19.95, and I think we probably had some conversations about that, and some of the other VPs, the sales VP, about we should price it higher, but we were kind of out of it because we didn't want to fork the community, in a sense. We didn't want to give anyone an excuse to stay in 2nd edition. We wanted them to move over to 3rd edition.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I was usually kind of the type of that's where I became more businessy, I think, sometimes in those. I think Magic also kind of worked my perceptions a bit, and so it's like higher, right? Because there's so much in role playing where like people make products that they can't make money from. It's like the Sea Devils.
The Sea Devils. That's exactly right.
Right.
So, our thinking was that I think, first of all, I think those books would end up being profitable, really profitable. They were already really profitable on the back list, right? So they would just keep selling.
Yeah, sure.
Right. But yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I don't think you ever lost sight of the passion for the game, right?
Yeah. Hey, we got just a couple minutes left. Where do you want to jump to for one more story?
Oh my gosh. You know what? WotC, look, Wizards of the Coast was an incredible place. As much as I love TSR, I was able to grow and experience things at Wizards of the Coast that I would never have been able to have done, right? No sane person would have given me control of a global brand like D&D. And so it was amazing. But the people there, I think, were the most amazing. And I just remember right around the holidays, we would have like a holiday choir.
Right.
Right. And so I remember this, and you were very, very supportive. And we would actually we had a concert in the all hands meeting room. And it was just incredible, right? It was just such an incredible experience because you're working alongside of these people, but then you're sharing things that go even beyond just your regular workday. That's again another highlight for me.
Well, by the way, speaking of the TSR choir, I think it's got to be the same thing. Did the TSR choir historically sing at Gen Con?
I don't know if we did. I don't remember doing that historically. So,
well, the first Gen Con I went to was 1992, which was 3 years, I think, before your first. And
we might have.
One of my most vivid memories, first of all, I dreamed of going to Gen Con for years. All my life, I wanted to go to Gen Con. It was like the Mecca, and it was in the Mecca Center, which was like, okay. So the first time I went to Gen Con, one of my vibrant memories, like going up up the escalator and landing in the exhibit hall foyer area. And there was a choir of about, I don't know, 10 people maybe singing sort of folk songs, like just like kind of fantasy like folk songs, and to set the tone. And it just struck me. I'd never seen that at a convention, and it set this mood that I just loved. And so, years later, when I got a chance to like acquire Gen Con for myself, I was like, I want to have music in the. I mean, that influenced me. That one.
I'll actually be honest with you. I think there's some memories I blocked out. I think we did do some. I think we did do some singing.
Oh, there's so many memories I blocked.
The TSR choir would also sing badly on purpose, and the executives would pay for us to go. So we would raise money for charity by doing that. We'd sing terribly until they paid us to get out.
Oh my goodness. That's crazy.
I know.
Yeah. So so when did you end up leaving WotC?
I left WotC right around 2001, I believe. I was placed in charge of the Pokemon product group. I was there for a year.
Yeah.
And I just realized that my passion wasn't really there in the product. And the folks that I knew from Wizards of the Coast had launched Sabertooth Games. Right. And then they were recently had been acquired by Games Workshop. So I went to work with them, and that was a great startup feel, right? You go from like the Pokemon product group down to, trying to beg retailers to stock your product.
Right.
That was a great experience, just kind of building that kind of business.
I'm trying to remember who else was in. Was that Luke Peterschmidt?
Luke Peterschmidt and Bob. I shouldn't forget his name. He was in charge of Bob Watts. Bob Watts. Yeah. So they started that, and so that was an incredible experience there. And then essentially, Games Workshop folded Sabertooth Games into their structure, and I didn't want to move.
Right.
So then I left, and I started working with Paizo. Lisa Stevens,
our old friend Lisa Stevens.
She was amazing. So and that business, the magazine business, is difficult. So when I was there, we had a transition basically to becoming a role-playing game publisher, and that team is an amazing team. Like those guys they've done such amazing things with that business. So I was there for about 3 years, and then in 2006, I moved to Chicago, which is where I live now.
Right. Yeah. So I got one final question for you as we're wrapping up. When you think back, like, I mean, you got to work on D&D, in the 90s, which was kind of a halcyon era of D&D, and Pokemon too. I mean, what do you take away from that? Like, what do you, now 20 years later, you look back, what is it that you go that you remember, like you hold on to from that?
Honestly, I'll be really honest with you. I hold on to the people. I hold on to it was like being in the trenches. You were in war in a sense, and the people next to you, the people around you that you were working with, it becomes like a band of brothers or sisters, of family. And even though I don't get to see them as much as I want to, I will always look back on that time, and I will think, not only did I have incredible experiences in business that I would never have had the opportunity to do, but I've met the most brilliant, amazing, passionate people. And you don't find those kinds of people in business or in your life every day. So I feel incredibly fulfilled to have had that experience, for sure. And honestly, when I think back, I thanked you at the very beginning. I'm so grateful to you for taking a chance and having us come out to Seattle.
Well, thank you for coming. What an adventure. Oh gosh. Well, thank you, Keith. All right. Well, that wraps up another episode of Fireside with Peter Adkison. Our guest next week will be Jean Raby and Mary Kirchhoff. If you haven't noticed, we have a bit of a theme going here that we're coming into regarding TSR fiction and authors. We had James Louder with Mary Kirchhoff a couple weeks ago, and the week after next, we are going to have Tracy Hickman on the show, and then during Gen Con Online, we're going to have Bob Salvatore on the show. So that's really pretty cool. We're going to bang out some history of TSR fiction here in the next few episodes. But in the meantime, there's plenty of other stuff to watch here on Gen Con TV. We have Friday, well, actually today on this show, just soon after this one, we will have a Gen Con anime watch party with Derek Guter. The Gutermeister will be there doing that. So that's great. On Friday, 2 p.m., we have Table Takes. Friday, 3:30 p.m., the specific time, we have the Gen Con Online Tabletop Simulator demo. And then at 5 p.m. Pacific, we have the Gen Con Online registration system opening, how that's all going to work out. Next week on Monday at 6 p.m., we have board games with the Brothers Murph. And on Wednesday at 1:30, we have board games with This Game Gets Dicey. And then at 4 p.m., we're back with me, and again with my guest, Gene Raby, with Mary Kirchhoff. So now remember, if you miss any of our shows live, you can find all of them about a day or so later on YouTube, on our Gen Con Videos channel, including all the episodes we filmed searching for untold stories behind Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons. Also, episodes of this show are available on podcasts. So please remember, follow, subscribe, turn on your notifications, tell your friends, blah, 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 because we'd love to see you more often. So thanks once again, Keith, our guest today. Thanks also to our studio manager, Marcus Mays, our streaming manager, Lauren Bond, our producer, Derek Guter, to Gen Con TV for hosting us. But thanks most of all to you for watching.